This is a companion video to the Café du Chat Noir, or the Black Cat Cafe video, in which I covered on how I constructed the cafe. In this video, I'll cover making all the food I used in the cafe, as well as a few extra things that I didn't have room for. With the exception of the 2 seafood dishes and the custard or flan, I made all of the food and drinks you see in the cafe. The food was made using polymer clay. So let's get started and I'll show you how I made it all. Most of the bread I made, I used a silicone mold like this, and this mold gives you like a little baguette that looks like that, and the color that I typically use of clay is just kind of that beige color. It's just a little bit of tan and white, and sometimes you can just buy it that color, and that's kind of most of them how I start. Now if I'm going to do something with it, like on the table with the cheese platter, and I'm going to cut it up, the first thing I do after I pull it out of the mold is I'm going to give it a little bit of color, and I'm going to use some chalk to do that. And I'm just going to brush the chalk. And when you use chalk and you bake this, the chalk will meld into the clay. So, and I like using chalk when I can, because, or soft pastels, because you can be a lot more sparing with how much you use and how much you add, as opposed to paint. You know, just trying to do a little paint is kind of hard to do sometimes. And so I'll add some color all around, and then maybe I'll add some other darker shades again until I get it, you know, pretty much the way I like it. And then I'm going to cut some pieces off of it, because we're going to have this thing where this is cut. And so I'm just going to start cutting on one end, and just cut as many pieces as you like, but I'm not going to cut the whole thing. And so once you're done with that, now I need to add some texture to the bread. And since it's a baguette, French bread, the good stuff, it tends to be very airy and have lots of holes inside. In addition to just pouncing it some with this toothbrush, I'm also going to come in with the pin and do some poking and lifting up some of the clay. And then I'm even going to come in with something larger with this pointed in and sort of create some holes as well, so that this looks like it's airier and not so dense. And I just want to keep doing that till I get it where I want it. And then you know, if you get it too much, you can always come back in with the toothbrush and then make it a little, close up the holes a little bit. So once I get done doing that and I'm happy with what I have, I'm going to do the same thing to all the little pieces. They're a little bit more difficult to work with. And really, if you're going to stack it like I did, if they're laying like this, you don't actually have to do both sides, because you're not going to see the one side. And then I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm going to use all the different tools to do this, poke it, and then I'm going to give it some couple of bigger things. And I'll continue to do that. And then once I'm done, I will bake all the pieces, and then I will just stack these back up again the way I cut them off, and glue them all in place. So another thing that you can do in terms of adding more is to give it that dusted flour look. Now you can either dust on some white chalk before you bake it, or this, for some reason, I seem to have a better luck with the white paint, acrylic paint. So after I have baked it, I'll come back in and let me get some paint out here. I just want a little bit of paint, and I'm just going to dust it. And I'm using one of these stencil brushes. You want to use a stiff brush to do it. And I'm just going to put some white on it so it looks just like it was dusted with a little bit of flour. And just make sure you just have tiny bit of paint on your brush. You don't want much. And just dust it. And you just get that look that it's got some flour on it. And I've got a little bit more than I do here. So, you know, just however much you want. I probably wouldn't put as much there. I just do it a little bit lighter like that. Now, one of the other breads that I cut open, again, another mold. It's this bread here. And I did the same thing here. I've molded it and pulled it out of the mold. And I started out by doing the same thing. I'm just dusting it with the chalk here. And getting all the color on it. And then I'm going to cut it up. And I'm going to do pretty much the same thing as I did with the baguette. I'm going to give it texture, except I want it to look denser. I don't want it to have a lot of big holes in it. So I'm going to cut it up. And of course, you'll want to take your time. I'm just kind of speeding through this so that this video isn't too long. And you just cut off however many slices you want. And again, I'm going to come in and pounce this to get texture on it. And then here I'm going to do kind of more like what I do when I do the cakes. Take a finer pin, and I'm just going to start picking at it and lifting up the clay. So this looks very coarse inside, very, you know, a lot of crummy, like it's got crumbs, lots of loose crumbs. And I'll just keep doing that until I've got what I like. Now you could always add some more chalk, like if you didn't think it was dark enough, you could add chalk to the inside too, not just to the outside. And I'm just going to keep working it until I get it good and flaky. And then, of course, I'm going to come in and do the same thing to the little pieces, which are now stuck. And if you're going to layer them back up again, same kind of thing. You don't need to do both sides, just the side that's going to show. No sense in doing more work than you have to. And then I'm going to come in and just start picking on this too. So it's pretty easy if you're, particularly if you're starting with a mold. And these molds that I'm using, Alpha Stamps is carrying all of them. And this particular set, sometimes molds, it's really hard or impossible to get the item out of it, so you have to bake it in the mold, which really limits what you can do to it, because everything you're going to do, you have to do after the fact. But these molds are pretty good that you can pull them apart like that and get the item out. So anyway, you can see how that's going to look with me picking that all apart. And then again, I'll just stack these up in a row as if just laying them down like they came off, like I cut them off in the order I cut them off. Then there's this mold here, and it's a croissant mold. It's got two different kinds. And here, all I did other than put the clay, same clay, put the clay in and pop it out, I baked it, and then after I came back in with some glossy accents, and I used that to put some gloss on it. And I don't know if you can see in the camera, maybe you can see in the picture up there, you can see the difference between the matte look of it and then painting it with glossy accents. So that's pretty easy. You just do that. Don't do it before you bake it, but do it after you bake it. And then, of course, you've got another mold here. It's a bigger mold that gives you a bigger piece there. And it's just round, and it's got all the cuts in it, and the cuts are kind of ragged. And of course, this one is kind that you could really do yourself. Just make a round ball, flatten it, and then make some crisscrosses, and then, you know, come in here and dig it out. And actually what I did is I came in and kind of roughed it up even more than it was. And here I'm using darker clay, so you can get variety not just by painting it with either acrylic paint or with soft pastels or chalk, which are chalk really. You can get variations in the color of the bread. And then here, either, you know, come in and dust it with some of the, got a little bit here. Come in and dust it with a little chalk. Or do what I did with the other one, bake it. And then I don't think you get as good a look like this with chalk. I think you need the acrylic. So this hasn't been baked, but I'll put a little paint on it just to make it look. So here you might want to come in and after you've baked it and add a little paint. And I think the example there that you see, I actually put the paint on it after the fact. And, you know, you could always cut a hole in these and stuff them with something. so that when you cut it open or show it cut open, it has something inside of it. So yeah, just add a little bit here and there, like it's dusted with flour. Now the next thing is what I used for the crackers. And here's some examples of some small ones, some dark colored ones. I did light ones. This has got all these different sizes, so you can do crackers or cookies. It works either way. But with the cheese platter, you see I've got all these crackers right here. And that's how I made those. And I used the same color as the bread, but then again, depending on the crackers that you want, you could use different colors. And it also has this other thing that to me looks like a breadstick. Comes out like this. So certainly like with the spaghetti dinner, I could have also, instead of the baguette, I could have had a little container with all these little breadsticks goes in there. And so those are really great for that. And like say, I've used them when I did the sweets and treats video, I used them for cookies as well. Now then, of course, you can make your own without using molds. And one of the other things I did was I used this square or rectangular cutter, and I used a little bit darker clay, a little bit darker brown, and I cut this and then just kind of rounded the edges. And then I came in with a blade, a fatter blade than my normal cutting knife, and I just came in here and made crisscross cuts all the way across, baked it, and then covered it with glossy accents, so that gave me a different look. And then here's another one that I didn't end up using, but I made. And here I just made the ball of clay and smashed it down so I get a flat on one edge. And then I came in with chia seeds. So, you know, there's no reason why you can't use some natural stuff. And if you're concerned about it turning on you or something, you can always seal it. But this way it looked like I had this really cool seeded bread on top. Another bread I made was a braided bread. I think that looks really interesting. And what I did was I rolled out, for just a double braid, I just rolled out 2 long pieces that are the same dimension. They don't have to be the same length. And I rolled out a lot more than I need. And to get it started, I'm going to press one down and then press the other end on it. And that's going to kind of keep it together while I braid it. And then I'm just going to braid one over the other, making sure that I keep this tight. Let me put it sideways, it might be easier. Just to make sure I keep this as tight as possible so I don't want any gaps or openings as I'm going over the back and forth over the bread. I'm just continuing to braid. Hopefully you can see that. You know, it's just causing it to be twisted together. And you know, you can do a really long one of these and then you get a bunch of pieces out of it. And so once I'm done, I'm going to come in and cut off the ends that I squished down. And then I'm just going to kind of round this off on the end here. Make sure the 2 pieces are together. And then just depending on how long I want the bread to be, say like right there. Again, I'm going to round this off. Make it a little blunt. Actually, I probably did that one a little too short. And I've got white clay in it now. So I'm just going to round it off. And there I have kind of a twisted braided bread. And then I might come in here with chalk and color it and that sort of thing. And then I think the examples I did, or the stuff I used in the cafe, I then used the glossy accents over it to make it look really shiny. But another option is to do 3. So like you were braiding hair, same kind of thing, but like I say, like you were braiding hair. So I smushed the 3 at the ends, and then I started doing the braid, trying to keep this as tight as possible. And you might have to kind of, like you would if you were doing hair, kind of like pull it up to keep that braid tight. And then keep going. And these, obviously, whoops, I just broke that one. I've got enough. These, obviously you make these a little bit thinner, or I probably could have gone a little thicker because it could be almost as thick as this. Or if you want it to be really flat and thick, you could use bigger pieces. But again, once I get the length that I want, I can cut it off, and I'll cut that off right where it broke. And then I'm just going to come in here and round off my little edges and kind of mish them together till I'm happy. And now this is another kind of braid. I guess you could kind of call this one more of a twist and then this one more of a braid. So it's pretty simple. And then you get something that looks a little bit more interesting. Now another thing I did is for the sundae, the strawberry sundae, I made a little cookie, like a sugar wafer, like you see a lot of times when you get a sundae, it's got a little wafer in it. And the way I did this, I used the same kind of clay, same color, and I've rolled it out very thin. And I have another mold that I use in the sweets and treats that makes this little wafer little thing, and I used it for the sweets, and I used 2 of them and stuffed something in between. But I thought, you know, I want that kind of waferish crisscross, and of course you can sit there and cut it, but I was looking at this, I thought, oh, I'll just use this as a stamp. So I just came in and pressed this in and made that into a little crisscross stamp. And then I came in here and cut away the edges until I got that little triangle. And then, of course, baked it. And I ended up with this. Now, let's say you wanted to make a whole cone, like you know, this cute little waffle cone. You could do the same thing. It's just stamp it more than once. Well, that's too hard. Don't stamp it that hard. You would just stamp it, pull it up. Well, now it's sticking. Stamp it. Oh, clay's too soft. Let me show you. See if I'll use this other piece. Maybe it won't go on this. Try this piece. Basically stamp it more than once and just make a larger piece. Well, all of it's sticking together. Anyway, my clay is very soft. So just stamp it, 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 stamp it. So they're all connected like you would with a rubber stamp. And then you can come in and cut something like this, and then maybe use scissors and cut around like this. And all of that would be the waffle pattern. And then you can come in, and of course you probably want to make something smaller than this and roll it together. It's probably longer than I need, but roll this together to make a cone, and you'll have that waffle look. And put your ice cream in there. So now to make the butter, and from here on out, I'm going to be mixing translucent clay with other colors. Because if you look at food, you look at meats and vegetables and fruits, there's a translucency to them. They're not matte looking like bread is. And to do this, I took some just dark yellow and some white, just a tiny bit of this and some white, and just got the clay to what the color I wanted. Of course, butter comes in a lot of different colors, shades of yellow. So it's kind of up to you, but I chose a lighter color. And then I mixed, this is about the ratio that I mixed, just a little bit of this to the translucent. So it's more than double, maybe 3 times as much translucent to the white, because butter is very translucent. And I mix the two together until I get something like this. And I don't know if you can see this on the camera, but it gets to where it has like a sheen on it. And if you roll it really thin, you can kind of see, you know, some transparency to it. So if it's not transparent enough, then just keep adding some more of the transparent clay until you get that kind of a look. And then of course you just shape it however you want. In the cafe one, I made it a smaller, like half of this size. If you want to do like more of a European style butter where it's thicker, wider than we have here usually in the US, you could do that. So it's really up to you. Or you could just put it in a little bitty container instead of trying to make a brick out of it, and just put a knife or something in it. Now, if you want to do something fancier, let's say that you want to, let's say make some kind of an herbed butter, or in this case, I'm going to make something that say maybe has parsley and sun-dried tomatoes in it. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my cheese, and this may be a little bit more than I need, and then I'm going to take 2 other colors, And I'm going to go ahead, and they will be much smaller amounts than the cheese. And the thing is, you can always add more of the colors if you think you need more green or more red or more of the butter. So I kind of start out with quite a bit of butter and then the cheese and the other two colors. Or, you know, you don't have to put two colors in it. And I just start chopping these up. And I want to chop them up as finely as possible. And the important thing here is you're chopping. You're not smashing. You're not pushing things together. You're just chopping. And actually this works better if your clay isn't that soft, because it's easier to cut. And of course it wants to stick together. And what I'm doing is I'm kind of mixing it. And I tend to do the colors first. And just as if I've got two especially, I tend to do the colors first and kind of get them cut up and blended, mixed. You might have to knock it off. And you're just going to keep doing this. And once you get that kind of mixed up and cut, you know, it doesn't have to be completely done yet. Then you want to start cutting up your butter and doing the same thing. And you're going to cut it into really, really small pieces. And I won't do it all on camera because it'll take a while. But you're going to keep cutting small pieces, and then you're going to toss all of that in. So what you're going to end up with as you continue to cut and toss, like I say, not smashing, because we don't want to mix this too much. We're just trying to get the colors integrated with each other. So you're just going to keep doing that. You can see I've done this for quite a bit, and I've just been tossing it with my blade and cutting some more like this. And so once you get this cut up and blended to your satisfaction, now you're going to bring this together into the solid. And like I said, if I felt like I needed more red or I felt like I needed more green, whatever it is that I thought I needed more of, I would just add that and then just fold that in. And now I'm going to push this together, and now I can put this in a bowl, or I can come in and, you know, I could do it like a ball, maybe because it's an herb butter. Maybe I have it rolled up into some kind of a ball. And then put that on the plate like that. And of course, you know, you could also cut some slices into it to expose the inside. And you've got the mixture. And the more you cut it up and fold it, the better this is going to be mixed, if you can see that. So, you know, you can do all kinds of things by using that technique. And I've used that technique also to make the cheeses that look like this. This I did exactly the same thing. I made my cheese, which I used a mixture of the color that I wanted, which is close to this butter color. It's like maybe a little bit whiter, not quite as yellow. I used that, and then I blended in, I think it was a very, very dark green, kind of a gray green. And I did the same process. I chop, flipped and flopped together, you know, blended, mixed, until I got, until I thought it was blended enough. And then I just pulled the thing together and rolled it into a ball and then smashed it down and worked on my edges. And I'm going to show you doing some of the cheeses too, but while I'm doing this blending technique, I wanted to cover it. So I did the same thing and then smashed it all together into my shape. And then of course this one I was going to cut open and have some slices, and you can see from the picture I've got some slices on the cheese tray. And so that gives me, you know, it could be an herb cheese, it could be something like a blue cheese, something like that. And of course, this, just like with this, you could add, with the butter, you could add more than one color. I'm also going to be doing sausage, and I'll show you that, but I'll just let you look at this now. I'm doing the same technique to get the sausage. I'm cutting up a variety of colors, mixing them, and then doing the same thing and shaping them into a sausage. So next we'll go into talking about the cheeses. Now, in terms of the cheeses, I would blend your colors first. And I have 5 different colors here. Something that's a little off-white would be like a brie. Maybe this yellowish would be, light yellowish would be a Gouda. And then there's lots of cheeses that are kind of a little bit orange in color, all the way to this one, which could be like a cheddar. And then, of course, I've already talked about how to make these kind of cheeses with all the different bits and pieces in them. And so once you get your color where you want it, then I would add the translucent clay, and I would do 1 for 1, whatever the size is of the clay that you're going to use for the color, the same size of the translucent, except for the brie. And the brie I double it, or maybe even more. You want it to be more like the butter. And if you look at brie, it's just a very, very translucent cheese. Now, in terms of shaping your cheese, there's two ways that I went about it. One way is I actually used a cutter. And for a cheese like brie, where you want, it's got more of a straight edge, it's not flattened out and rounded. I treated it more like a cake. And so I did a stack of these. I ran it through the pasta machine and layered it together, and then cut it out with this cutter. And then what you could also do is, if you notice some of the brie, it actually has more of a lip on the edge. So you could come in here and actually press around the edge and just kind of create that lip if you want. You don't have to, but they're not all like that. But keep your edge kind of straight. And then because if you're going to cut into this and you're going to need to see all the way around it, then the way I went about covering it, because now you want that white floury looking thing on around it, is I just cut more pieces like I do a cake. And I just pretended like I'm icing a cake. And I put one on the bottom, one on the top, and then I have a strip here that I can use to go around the edge. Put that around. And I'll just snip off the excess and then use my fingers to blend this. And then I'll snip a lot of the excess off here. Okay, so now I've got it, and now I'm just going to come in here and smooth all my edges so that you don't see that seam. And I would spend a little time doing this. I'm doing this really fast so that the video is already going to be very long. So I would just keep blending this until I got everything smooth and there's no lines, no seams where those white pieces meet. And then you could repress the center area if that's how you want to do it. So once I've got that, like I said, I would do more of that and get it really nice looking. Then you want to give it. You notice how you can kind of see with that flour coating. Sometimes you can kind of see the cheese underneath it. So I came in here and I really gave it a whack with this. And what it's doing is it's actually going through the clay, and I start to see the brie cheese itself underneath. And so I do that to the sides and I do that to the top, and you can also see all this little bumpy texture that's giving it. So it's kind of looking like that flour skin it has on it. And so like I said, I do that all the way around, get it as much as I want, making sure that I kind of see that brie color coming through. And then, of course, I'm going to come in and I'm going to make my cuts and cut away my pieces. And these will probably look better if you spend more time blending and whatnot. But see, you got your little brie color inside there. So cut away what you want. And in terms of texturing the cheese like brie, very smooth. You don't need to texture it. And then, of course, you would bake this, and that would be your brie. Now, another way of shaping a cheese would be just to do it by hand, and I think that works the best if you're looking at a cheese like a Gouda. And I'll make a smaller piece of this, and I'm basically getting it into a ball, as good a ball as I can get, as round a ball as I can get. Once I get it into a ball, then I am just going to take something and press. And I get this shape, which I think looks very much like a piece of Gouda. But of course we need the red covering. And again, because I'm going to cut this open, I want to treat this like it was a cake. And I want to cover everything. And always when you're covering it with whatever skin, make sure you have no air bubbles, because those will pop up during baking. And then I've got a strip to go around it. Get a little thinner. And then you can see the picture on the screen there, what it looks like when it's finished. But you're going to wrap this, and then you're going to do the same thing. You're going to smooth your edges. Just make sure that it doesn't start to get flat again. And as you smooth your edges, you might find, oh, it's not as flat as it was, and it's not bulging as it was. So then you can just push it out again and get that bulge. And of course, I'm not going to cut this open because I'll finish working on it and make it look prettier. But the same thing, once I get it all shaped, and in this case, you don't need to do any texturing on the outside. You're going to cut your slices, bake it, and when you are done, then to give it that, if you want to give it that, sometimes they have a waxy look and sometimes they have more of a glossy look. So I just painted mine once it was baked, and the pieces, just the skin part, I baked it with, or I painted it with glossy accents. So another option would be to, let's say, for example, that you're not going to cut it open. You're going to leave it intact. And so maybe I take it and I go ahead and make my shape. And now I don't really care that much about the bottom. So what I will do is simply cover it with the skin on the top and get rid of excess. Actually, I'll cut away a lot of this, the corners. And you're just going to fold it underneath, but it doesn't have to be pretty. Now, if you want to make it pretty, you can make it pretty, whatever you want to do. But you don't have to do that if you don't want to. And so I don't bother with all the cake business and all that blending. Just pinch, cut away the excess, fold it over, cut away that excess. I'm just going kind of fast here, but do take your time. And you can fold it over. And so I'm using a color that's just a little bit darker than the clay itself. So if I were going to cut it open, you would get, you know, the exterior that's just slightly different than, and I'll go ahead and make a cut in this. So that looks cool. And another thing that I did on some of them is even after putting a skin on it like this, I still came in and brushed some chalk on it just to give it some more variation. And you could do that too, just to make it more interesting. Now, you could not put the skin on at all and just chalk it. And that would make it look like it has like a thin skin or something that happened in the aging process. So you could just do that. You could leave it alone. Or like I said, if you covered it completely, then you could come in and cut it open. And you'll see, at least on the one side, you'll see. So you get something like that, where you've got the lighter cheese in the middle, that, and then you've got the darker here. Now, if you're dealing with a cheese, let's say like it's a cheddar or something, then you want to put some texture in it. So you might want to come in with a pin, and you can see the cheese that's a lot like this on the cheese tray. I added a little texture to the cheese. So you can do that too if you want. And then the last thing I'll talk about is if you want to not make a round but make a brick, which something like a cheddar, you might want to make a brick instead. And so I'm just using a different cutter and doing a thicker piece, pushing that out, and then you can shape it. And when I show you the sandwich later on, that's what I did. I had made a brick of cheddar, and then I was just able to slice it off. And you could do a skin or not a skin, but that gives you, you know, different shape besides the round ones. And then in the pictures, anywhere where you see I've made cheese wheels, some of them what I did is I just took a round piece of wood, it's actually a bead, and I glued two of them together, and I just covered them with some tissue paper. And then on my collage sheet, if you saw the video before, I've got a new collage sheet and digital kit that have cheese wheel labels, and then just put the label on it. So it's just a faux piece of cheese. There's really nothing in it. And then I also, you know, took some of the cheeses that I didn't open up and just put one of those labels on the outside. So that's a bunch of options for you to make cheese. Now, making the sausage, you're going to take the same approach as the cheese with the stuff in it and the the butter with herbs and stuff in it, and you're going to use 4 different clays. One would be kind of a wine colored, another would be a red that is got a lot of brown in it, a white, and then translucent, and the same amount of each one. Now, unlike the other things where we did this technique, you do not want to mix the translucent in with anything before you start chopping everything up. So you're going to chop up all 4 of the different clays separately, or not mix them before you start chopping. And you're going to use the same method of, and you can see I've done it already here, just like I did with the butter and the cheese. You're just going to chop it up and blend it. And the reason you're not mixing in the transparency is because you would have veins of fat in the sausage, and that's why you want that transparent separate. So once you get it mixed up enough, just like with the butter, I'm going to put this together. And unlike the butter, you are going to need this just a little bit. We want just a little bit more mixing than we had with the butter. And so I just would take off however much I want and go ahead and shape it. Let me cut a little off. It's a little bit big. Now, the more you mess with this, the more blended those colors are going to get. So you want to be careful not to do too much. You don't want to run it through your pasta machine or anything like that, because it's just going to blend it all together and you'll lose the definition that you have now. So that's your basic sausage. And of course you can play with the colors, because some sausages are browner versus the red one that I have here. So you can play with your colors, and so that way you can make different kinds. Now, the technique that I'm going to use is one that I got from, I think it's called the Charm Shop. If you don't subscribe there, you should. I mean, she does beautiful polymer clay work. And what she does to her sausages is she makes like cuts in them, like this. Just cuts grooves in them. And then she bakes this, and after it's baked, she paints this with white acrylic paint. Not heavy, thick. Like, it's okay to, you can see from the picture of my sausage, it's okay to have maybe a little bit of the sausage showing through. And then she rolls it while the paint is still wet. She rolls it in baby powder. Now, I did not have baby powder, so basically I just took some chalk and a blade and just basically just crushed this stuff. Crushes really easy, and so I did that, and I rolled it in the chalk instead of using baby powder that I didn't have. And of course you do that after it bakes, and then after that, then you can go through and cut your sausage apart into the little slices, and you can see from mine how that looks. So you got that white, they got the white casing. So I think that looks really cool, and with the acrylic paint, that kind of brings out those cut marks that you make. Now, another option for your sausage is, instead of coating it with the by painting it with the white, you can take some of the transparency, roll that out, film, and roll. You can see here I have the sausage rolled in that transparency film, and use that as the casing. And then when it's baked, it looks like this. So you can still kind of see the meat through it. But it gives it a different look. And then here you can see these cut, and of course you get that same kind of, if you can see that there, you get that same kind of edge that you see there. So that's another option. And of course, you could roll your sausage out much longer, and you could, you see sausages that have various shapes, bent, whatever. And so, they don't all have to be fat and straight. And then another thing that you can do is take the sausage and stuff it. So I could spread this out and just make a and this I probably had a little bit too much white, because it's too It's a little too much fat in there. It's a pretty fat sausage. And just trim it up a little bit. And I could stuff it with some cheese. I could do that a couple of different ways. I can roll out a piece of cheese and then just take my sausage and roll it inside. Maybe take away any excess like that. And roll it. Trim off my edges. Maybe pinch it a little bit. And now when I cut it open, I will have the cheese inside. And of course you can stuff it with all kinds of things. Or you could do maybe more like a swirl. So you could have a piece of cheese inside of it and lay it on top with it just a little bit, and do it like that and roll it into so that you've got some kind of swirl. And then you've got something that looks more like that. So that's options for making sausage. Too, when it's laid out, I mean, you could cut it in other ways. You could turn it into bacon. I mean, if you shaped it, cut it, you could, I mean, it looks like beef, so you could use it for beef too. And then, like I said, you can play with the colors and get different colored sausages and different mixes. The food tutorial is taking a little bit longer than I thought, so this video had gotten pretty long by the time I got to the end of the sausages. So I'm breaking this into 2 parts. So this will be what you just watched is the first part. You can then jump to the second part where I'll cover the rest of the food. And just so you know, it's the usual. If you want supply information, a lot more pictures, collage sheet, that sort of thing, you can hop over to my blog. I'll have the link in the description area. Otherwise, if you still are enjoying this, then you might want to go look at part 2.